and Standard Chartered. In some cases, firms took extra precautions that affected permissible trade. Many small and mid-sized companies for whom compliance with overlapping and layered regulations was too costly and cumbersome simply left the Iranian market. The complex U.S. framework for secondary sanction is no longer properly understood as sanctions against Iran, but rather U.S. sanction against third country companies that do business with Iran. Over the past several years, there has been a series of settlements, each exceeding $100 million between U.S. authorities and non-U.S. banks, including ABN AMRO, Barclays, Credit Suisse, ING, Lloyds, and Standard Chartered, alleging violations of U.S. sanctions against Iran and other countries. Now, there is no transparency, but recently there is a possibility of getting judicially scrutinized the executive determination. That is what the recent case laws that are coming from United Kingdom and European Union, they demonstrate. It is pertinent to note that executive determination with regard to the involvement of certain Iranian banks have not been brought under the judicial scrutiny in the US. However, recently, similar sanctions have been brought under the scrutiny of Supreme Court in London and the General Court of the European Union. These cases are great eye-opener. In a series of recent judgments, the fourth chamber of the General Court of the European Union annulled the designation of some of the largest privately held commercial Iranian banks on EU's sanctions list. On 11 December 2012, sanctions against Sina Bank were annulled. Similarly, sanctions against Bank Mellat were struck down on 29 January 2013. On 5th February, sanctions targeting Bank Sadarat met the same fate. Further illustrating the General Court's willingness to annul sanction, if their adoption is not based on sufficient evidence and if the entity concerned is not given ample time to review and respond to the evidence against it. The brief background of the sanction regime involved in these cases. On 26 July 2010, the Council of European Union imposed sanctions on a number of Iranian banks, listing them in Annex 2, Council Decision 2010/413 CFSP. The sanctions included, inter alia, the freezing of assets and economic resources of entities presumed to be linked to Iran's nuclear proliferation program. Bank Sadarat and Bank Mellat were two of several listed banks, and their funds and assets were frozen across the EU. In Decision 2010/413, the Council stated that Bank Mellat is a state-owned Iranian bank, engages in a pattern of conduct which supports and facilitates Iran's nuclear and ballistic missile programs. As for Bank Sadarat, the Council got a little bit more specific and held that it is an Iranian state-owned bank, 94% owned by Iran government, and has provided financial services for entities procuring on behalf of Iran's nuclear and ballistic missile programs, including Iran Electronics and Mesbah Energy Company. In October 2010, both banks appealed against the decision, arguing that the Council had not advanced any evidence in support of its claim. The banks thus argued that the fundamental rights of the defense and the right of effective judicial protection were breached and that the Council violated its obligation to give reasons for their designation. Secondly, they claimed that the Council had committed a manifest error of assessment as regards the adoption of restrictive measures against them. Thirdly, The banks argued that the designation was an infringement of their right to property and of the principle of proportionality. In both cases, the Council argued that the banks were emanations of the Iranian state and therefore not entitled to rely on fundamental rights protection and safeguards under EU law. According to the Council, a state is the guarantor of respect for fundamental rights in its territory but cannot qualify for such rights. The General Court firmly rejected this argument. It held that EU law contains no rule preventing legal persons, even if they were emanations of the non-member state, which was not proven in this case, from relying on fundamental rights protection and guarantees. Moreover, the General Court held that the fact that a state is the guarantor of respect for fundamental rights in its own territory is of no relevance as regards the extent of the rights to which legal persons which are emanations of that same state may be entitled. Infringement of the obligation to state reasons the bank's rights of defense and their right to effective judicial protection. Turning to the substance of the case, the General Court held that the obligation to state reasons for an act adversely affecting person constitutes an essential principle of EU law and may only be derogated from for compelling reasons touched upon the security of the Union or its members. The Council is thus under an obligation to disclose the considerations which led to the adoption of the sanctions, and the considerations must be sufficiently detailed and clear. Additionally, the Council must notify the designee in good time so that he has ample time to review the Council's file and to make known its own point of view. The banks also claimed that the reasoning for designation provided by the Council was not substantiated by evidence, and consequently, the Council made a manifest error on assessment by putting the two banks on the sanctions list. The General Court largely agreed with this argument. First, in the Bank Sedarat case, the General Court established that the Council had acted on a mistaken factual premise by asserting that the bank was 94% held by Iranian state, when in fact the state was only a minority shareholder. Second, the General Court held that, in both cases, that the fact that the Iranian state holds shares in the banks did not imply in itself that they were facilitating nuclear proliferation. Furthermore, the Council did not present any evidence that the banks were providing illicit services to entities that were engaged in proliferation. Third, the General Court had asked the Council to submit evidence to support its claims, but the Council failed to do so. On the contrary, the Council argued that burden was on the bank to produce evidence that it was not involved in facilitating nuclear proliferation. The General Court swiftly dismissed this argument. The burden of proof was upon the Council, and the absence of evidence should not be held against the banks. In the light of the foregoing, the General Court decided in both judgments that the sanctions had to be partially annulled and that there was no need to further examine the bank's claim concerning infringement of the principle of proportionality and of the right to property. The judgment raised a number of interesting issues. First, in both cases, the General Court referred to the role of diplomatic cables, the so-called WikiLeaks, and the suggestion that some member states, in particular the United Kingdom, were subject to American pressure to ensure the adoption of restrictive measures against Iran. The General Court, however, firmly rejected the bank's allegation that this cast doubt on the lawfulness of the measures and of the procedure for their adoption. It held that the fact that member states might be subject to diplomatic pressure, even if proven, did not imply in itself that such pressure had any effect on contested measures. Second, the General Court confirmed that if the Council is going to rely on member states' information as evidence for including entities on EU sanction list, it's obliged to conduct its own assessment of the relevance and validity of the evidence. The incorrect statement in the Council decision concerning the extent of the Iranian state holding the bank Sadarath indicated that no such checking took place. Finally, this is very important, the General Court's judgment show that Council does not have unfettered discretion to designate undertakings and persons on the sanctions list without providing sufficient evidence to support its claim and without giving the designatee ample chance to exercise its right to self-defense. Interestingly, neither the Council nor the Commission invoked confidentiality reasons for not presenting evidence against the banks to the General Court or the applicants. Rather, the General Court notes that Council simply did not put forward any evidence even though the General Court requested the Council to do so. The General Court did thus not get a chance to rule on the legality of relying on classified information or how the Council could base its decisions on such information without infringing the defendant's right of defense. But regardless of the rulings, the EU will be utterly careful not to disclose or upset the intelligence sources. Without an EU-led spy agency, Brussels relies fully on member state support to obtain any such information. Opening up its information and source to the public would probably dry them up for good. But the sensitive issue of using intelligence as an evidence in court has not only caused a severe judicial headache for the Luxembourg court, the same thing happened in the decision in UK Supreme Court, and that is on another important case concerning this bank Mellet. The Supreme Court has quashed in that case, the Supreme Court of United Kingdom, the financial restriction Iran Order 2009, writing the judgment for majority in that case. Lord Sumpton held that the order was irrational, unjustifiable, as it singled out the bank even though it posed no risk than other Iranian financial institutions. In this particular case, it is the first time in the UK judicial history that there was a secret argument leaving the defense outside the court. It is a kind of a camera procedure. To conclude, the law is very clear, as summed up in the first part of the presentation, that the unilateral secondary sanctions targeting financial institutions are violative of international law as it interferes with sovereignty of state. They are illegally extraterritorial in purpose and effect. It affects free movement of capital. The unilateral secondary sanctions are unreasonable and impermissible under international law. Moreover, the unilateral secondary sanctions, as we have seen, instead of providing necessary immunities to the central bank as it performs sovereign function, because it performs several functions like market regulator and it performs a function to maintain a price stability and inflation, and the states used to target the central banks. The recent court decision from UK and EU indicate that the blacklisting of financial institutions under sanction regime has not been done on a sound and factual basis. Mostly it is done by the executive in a non-transparent way without subjecting the decision under judicial scrutiny. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Gandhi, for a very comprehensive review of the recent developments and case law on illegality of sanctions imposed against financial institutions of third parties. We'll break at the moment for about 20 minutes for tea. Thereafter, we'll reassemble at 4:25, and Dr. Rajesh Babu would then make his presentation on sanctions and international trade law. So we'll break for tea now. Thank you.